this is not about me at all.
Mm.
This is about this awareness. What I always say is we need to raise the level of awareness for people in businesses, but also for individuals, because you are the one who is responsible and accountable for your own life. And if you wait for other people to decide for you, and that is what I've done in some elements or some phases in my own life, it doesn't feel right. So you need to make the choice for yourself that you will be a friend to yourself, that you start growing your self-worth either by yourself or with people from the Self-Worth Academy or with whoever out there that you believe and trust. And then you can create a good world for yourself, but especially for your children, if you have children. And if you don't have children, you can still think of you can be a role model for other people.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today I am with Sonja, and it's really interesting. We're talking English right now, but we're actually both Dutch. And a lot of people didn't know. I don't think you thought did you know I was Dutch?
No.
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 But we're delivering this in English, and we might be throwing a little bit of some Dutchness in there as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today about self-worth. We have actually never met before, hence why we both didn't know we are both Dutch. Well, I knew you were Dutch, but I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about your story, Sonja. Could you share a little bit more about how self-worth has entered your life? Like, what was the first encounter for you?
Yeah, I think self-worth has been around me or with me ever since, but I just didn't know that it was called self-worth. And that's also like, I at some point, I think we live in 2021 now. So in 2017 or 18, there was this man that I met. He was delivering a sales workshop with one of the companies that I work with. And at some point I told him, like, you're delivering this sales workshop, but I think you do much more. So can you give me some information around the people that you see in this meeting room? And he pinpointed straight away, like, okay, that's a person like who works in sales. He has this and this and this talents and maybe those issues. And he was so spot on that I was like, there's much more to this man than I expected it to be. So we spent dinner together because this man, of course, was John Nyland, who wrote this book that is now standing on my bookshelf. He just finished his manuscript that day or the day before. And we were talking about self-worth and his journey around self-worth. And what I found is that my life and my life story had so many parallels to what he was talking about. But as I mentioned, I never knew that the word for it was self-worth. And yeah, what I was talking to him about, but also what I've spoken about earlier on, there have been moments in my life that, yeah, I just didn't know exactly what to choose, what decisions to make. And my issue, I think, has been ever since I grew up, like when I feel safe, when I feel comfortable, when I feel that I have the right level of confidence, I can do whatever I want. Even though I find it really scary or I'm anxious, I will just go for it. When I don't feel safe, or when I feel too safe, so when I trust another person too much, maybe even, I can outsource my decision-making process. So then I would say, like, okay, so you have now heard my story. What would you do? And then I would go for what that other person would tell me. So if that person would say, and that person, of course, that I trusted really a lot, if that person would say, I think that would be a really good way for you to go, or that is a good decision to make, I could think, okay, if that person that I hold really highly, if that person would say this, then it might be a really good option. But what I didn't know is that that person, of course, didn't know me the way I know me. So in some of these instances, and it can be really tiny examples or bigger examples, I sometimes went with that decision that that other person made or thought of, but it didn't really fit with what I really wanted. So I was not in touch with my inner self. And yeah, that's what we were talking about during that dinner. And also what I was doing at that moment, I already went to an executive coaching program. So the last year, 2020, of course, it was a really maybe lonely year for a lot of people sitting at home. But for me, it was also a gift because I had started in 2016, I started an executive coaching curriculum at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, or Free University of Amsterdam, working on my self-reflection and how I work with clients. So my clients primarily are big corporations, international, multinationals, primarily in the technical area. And I speak that language. I have been on boards and on leadership teams of those organizations. And what I saw is that there's also a lack of, the emotional side of leadership in those organizations. And people know it, leaders know it, people working in those organizations know it, but they just don't have the language or the courage to speak up. And that's also one of the reasons why I started this studies. And as I mentioned last year, I finished 2 masters. So one is the one in Amsterdam. But I also decided to move on to the Ashridge program, which is 50% is the same content. But I also wanted to become accredited. And the question, of course, is why do you want to become an accredited coach if you have a CV like you have? And that's also a question that some people ask me. But that is my self-assessment element. So if you would look at that book, that is, I now have to point the right finger there. There is a shift in the self-worth journey. And it's about, instead of assessing yourself, you need to start asserting yourself. So there's always this inner voice, that inner critic in my mind that keeps telling me, are you good enough? Why are you the person who needs to go there? Do you need to read more books? Well, you can see how many books there are behind me. And people who know me, they know that I can just pull a book from that bookshelf and say, oh yeah, that person has done some research, or that person knows more about it. And my close friends then also ask me, like, what's your story? And I do have a story, but I don't know what that is. That is part of me. My inner critic always tells me, you need to pull in the people who are the real experts. So, that's my self-asserting journey maybe as well. Like, when is it good enough? When am I good enough? And that's also what I work with my clients, with organizations, but also with individuals, because a lot of people struggle with that.
When are you good enough? Or am I good enough?
Are you good enough? And I think, are you good enough? And just silencing your inner critic and recognizing that inner critic is really key. And that's a part of the self-worth journey. So if you know, and if you can be that friend to yourself, and initially I always thought being a friend to yourself, that sounds so fuzzy. And I think I'm some sort of more technical person. So for me, it was a bit like, there we go again. But in the end, that is really key to what you do. If you do not believe in yourself, and as I always call it, you need to grow yourself. You need to understand yourself and also spend time with yourself, because then you can create a ripple effect and make much more impact to other people. And the fun thing is that the Self-Worth Academy logo reflects that as well. So it all comes together. So that's what I like.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I'd never heard your story before, so this is really interesting to hear, and to hear your perspective as well, and coming from the leadership and the executive side. I find myself as well sometimes just wondering how can I approach from that perspective, not having been in that area or worked in that field. And I think it's a huge benefit to be able to, like you said, once you have worked in that field and you're able to connect to yourself, you're able to connect with them and with others, and which is, I guess, something that any executive leader would be amazing to connect in with, that intrinsic self-worth, that value, and share that with others and be able to, I see it's like a communication, it's a connection with not only with your team, but also with the clients out, like you said, a ripple effect. So thank you for sharing that. And I wonder if, for me, going back to the beginning of your story, of not knowing that this was called self-worth, I personally have had that as well. Is there maybe a word, even in Dutch, since you were mentioning a lot of your listeners might be Dutch, how would you describe self-worth, either in Dutch terms or in layman's terms? Like, what are the ways, like some of the shifts you mentioned from self-assessing to self-asserting, but other little examples that could hint at what self-worth actually means, because it is new. It is new to the world in a way, but it's also new to the Netherlands, you mentioned before. So I don't know if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so looking at the term self-worth, if I think about it in Dutch, it's quite difficult to translate. So I think if I'm reading that book, but I'm also, of course, reading a lot of other stuff, as I mentioned before. Like, there are multiple authors who have already touched upon this concept of self-worth. And in Dutch, they would say maybe eigenwaarde. So yeah, it's the worth of you as a person. But there's also, that's the same as in English. Like, are we talking about self-esteem or self-worth? And when are we talking about self-esteem and self-worth? And for the research that I did for both my article that I posted for the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, I've been looking into research on self-worth and what is needed to get self-worth, and also whether people understand the concept of self-worth.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't recall the name, and I can find it and post it somewhere online. I don't recall the name of the research team, because there were multiple people who worked on this one, but they make a link between self-worth and self-esteem. So self-esteem can float, like it can be high or low, but that is different for self-worth. You either have self-worth or you don't. And of course, there are also gray areas in between the level of your self-worth. But the higher your level of self-worth is, the easier it is to go from low self-esteem to high self-esteem, because it is related to resilience.
Exactly.
And if you can sit together, like with yourself, like you and you, all your me's, like there's also a book behind me about the different me's. And one of the me's might be that inner critic. There's also your inner child in you. And there's also your own supporter in you. So, and that's what I like with for instance, the film Inside Out. There are all these voices in your mind, and who do you put in front of your driver's seat? If you decide consciously to put your inner critic in the driver's seat, I think a lot of people don't do that consciously, but that inner critic is there quite a lot, then of course you will start assessing yourself, depending of course on what your inner critic tells you. That inner critic is related to the patterns that you grew in your life scripts from your past, probably. But if you know, hey, oh, my inner critic is behind the driver's seat in my bus, maybe I should take my inner child in front of the people in that bus and behind the driver's seat. And I've done some what is it, voice dialogue exercises on this as well. So, and initially I was like, a voice dialogue, me, why? But it really helped because, yeah, like a lot of people that I work with, they get a lot of stuff and information from books and from here.
Mm-hmm.
And like me, I think a lot of people that I work with, they have shut down their emotional side. Mm. But if you do that, you do not use your complete system because you are more than just your brains. You are also your body, your heart, your tummy. And there are also energies happening in that space. So how can you make sure that you get in touch with them? So that's really critical. So what I did in the voice dialogue exercise is my coach asked me the question like, hey, 3 chairs in a row, sit on the middle one. And this is also related to polarities because we all have different behaviors, thoughts, and everything else. And there's the maximum and the minimum field. And those are the polarities, the poles. So are you aware of your poles? So what I did with my coach is I sat in the middle chair and I was just me. And then the question was, okay, go sit on the chair left from you. And that was the inner critic chair. So who is that person? Talk like that person. And it was a really, really fun exercise to do. But it also made me really feel that I was that inner critic. And it made me feel compassionate about my real me, the one in the middle, the person on the meta level chair, the midpoint chair. So sitting in that chair of the inner critic, the question that my coach asked me, what do you see? What kind of person or thing are you? And I was a big bear. I was a big bear protecting the middle me. Like every time there was something, this bear or my inner critic would say, okay, go away, or I will eat you, or I will be aggressive, but also telling me, you need to do this, you need to finish this exercise, you need to read everything because you need to be all-knowing. And that is, of course, if you do that all the time, it will end you up in a burnout. The next exercise that my coach asked me to work on is go to the other side, to the right side. And what happened there I called myself the chameleon bird. And the chameleon bird was a bird, a really tiny bird who could fly everywhere. Like, hey, if there's anything interesting, I would go there and there and there. And that's what happens when I feel safe. But then I can be quite innovative. Like I can just go from here to there, hak op de tak, as we say in Dutch. And people who know me know that too. And I know that too. But when am I in that bird chair? And when am I in the bear chair? When am I in the middle chair? So for me, this was important because I did some research on that for my, the action inquiry for Ashridge. How can I integrate those polarities and use my full range of behavior? So, and I called it the polarity paradox. And the polarity paradox is, I got it from Herb Stevenson, so it's not my invention, it's what I read from him, and I spoke with him about this as well. And what he has done is he's created a model, and that is linking vulnerability levels to the level of presence. And he also uses that meta level. So he has a point of pure, I don't recall the exact word, but it's the midpoint on which you have the full overview. And you can also help yourself instead of just going to one field, like, hey, I'm now too vulnerable, maybe even. Okay, I can get myself back into the meta level and see what is really required for my client or the person that I'm talking to. But to do that, I think it all comes back to self-worth.
And awareness, in a way.
And
of knowing.
awareness, and also understanding your triggers. Yeah, and yeah, I think if you would, and of course your question was also like, hey, how would you do this in Dutch? And how would you give words to this in Dutch? Yeah, I struggle with it. And I can try.
It's like an experience, right? I find it sometimes very difficult to explain because it's an experience one feels. Once you connect with it, then it's like, but sometimes it's hard to explain, even like love. How do you explain love? It's like a feeling. And so self-worth to me is like sometimes as well. But I think that what you mentioned about this unconditional friendship, I think that is the essence, or like being kind to ourselves, as if we were to a baby, because we all were once a baby. We all were born innocent and pure. So yeah, and then explaining in a Dutch, of course, with the Dutch mindset, and it may also, of course, be completely different to how you would explain it to an English, or you mentioned before, an American crowd, because all the different types of upbringings. So I would love to hear, like, with the other perspective, and of course we've got Self-Worth Week coming up in February. Can you give us a little taster of, how are you bringing some of the elements together in one of the workshops you're going to be sharing with us?
Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, the other perspective, that's the name of my business. And I have a network of coaches and consultants, and we all work mainly internationally. And the background of most people is that they have worked as a leader or internationally, and they can work with boards or one level below. So it's primarily working with teams and helping them with their journey. So what we don't do, and what I don't do, is come up with a plan. Like the plan is from step 1 to 10, and that's what we will be doing, because I just don't believe in that. And what one of my clients told me last year was quite interesting, because I had never thought about that, is there are consultants, they come in and they bring in a bunch of people and they just change the organizational setup. They go with question number 1, they fix some stuff, and at some point they have created the result, and then they are gone. What my client told me is that she never knew really what I was going to do, but she trusted what I was going to do because I kept her in the loop all the time, and her team, and I co-created the journey with them. So what she told me is, hey, you are the black box person. I said, what does that mean? She said, like, okay, you are not afraid of the black box. And that black box is what you don't know in an organization. So there are hidden rules, there are hidden agendas, but no one knows it. It's like 2 fish coming together in, I don't know, the ocean. One is asking about the water to the other one, and the other one says, I don't know what water is. What is water? And that's the same in that black box. People are working according to whatever that may be. Some people call it culture, some people call it hidden agendas, but it's what you just mentioned. It's about the feeling you get, about having the feeling that people want to fit in. And that's what everyone wants. They all want to be seen. And it's really difficult. And looking at the context, for instance, in the Netherlands, to stick your head out of the maaiveld, as we call it, like your head will be chopped if you do something different. And that is okay. But if you feel that you are safe, as I mentioned before, like when I feel safe, I dare to explore. I dare to do things that some people might say, ooh, that's scary or different. And for me, it feels scary and different, but it also feels it's part of what I want to do. It's my purpose. And if you have that alignment with people in organizations, and if you first check what do they want, what is their desire, what is their purpose, and that's a question that is not being asked that much by their leaders. to be honest. But their leaders, they really enjoy it, having these conversations. So when you do that, and when you build the trust, and when you really see a person as a whole person, so not just their head, but like also their talents, and also what they do outside of work, because that's also quite key. Like, where are you in your life? Where are you in your journey, your career? So if you bring that all together, and it sounds maybe a bit much, but it's just some conversations and you know much more about people. So really ask people, what do you want to do? And then you get this information. Then if you dive back into that black box, you can also look at like, hey, what is really useful? So instead of changing everything because you have that 10-step approach and it needs to look like this, of course not. It needs to look like what it should look like. So especially in organizations who've been around for 50, 60 years that I work with a lot, there is so much good work done, but maybe it's a bit outdated. So if you just change it, and if you, and that was one example, like if you just change an app on your phone, it's a small change. But if you do the whole iOS change, of course, the whole feature and the look and feel and everything else behind it is also changing. So be mindful about what you do. Is it a small change or is it a big change? And how do you communicate about it? But change is not about putting it on a piece of paper. It's about doing it together, because then it becomes a movement and it will happen. So in this black box approach, you just use everything that is working and that people get energy from, but also you're not afraid of stopping initiatives that don't work and throwing stuff away that is obsolete. And if you do that together with the client and with organizations, they will not be dependent on you. They will be dependent on themselves. And that's important with the way we work, with the other perspective, but also with the board whisperers that I've set up with my business partner, Daphne Laan. So we look at what is really helpful and what works well, what is aligned to the purpose. Can people do it themselves? If not, they will be trained to do it from a sustainability point of view. And there is no right or wrong in my life or in my world. It's postponing the judgment is so important. Like, let's look at the talents that we have to work with. And if people are being asked to do something that's not part of their skill set, just have a conversation. Is it something they want to learn? Or is it so in their allergy zone that you don't even want to ask them to learn? So yeah, it's the individual approach that creates the whole team. I think that's key. And as part of this black box approach, in the end, the deliverable will be owned by the organization and not by a consultant or an external coach. It's theirs. And they just got a bit of advice and tips and tricks, but not someone who's stepping in as an interim manager. It's always going to be the choice of the organization, linked to the energy. I think that's really key.
That's wonderful. Wow. What an experience to take a company through.
Yeah. And also what my experience is we sometimes start really small because it's just a small question. But it happens with organizations that it's like, hey, wow, we have sparked something. We've created that spark and there is a lot of energy underneath. But how are we going to channel it? Sometimes we start, or I start off really, really small, just with one leader in an organization. And then because of the click, there needs to be a click and there needs to be trust between the two of you. And you need to work together. And it's in the field that you create together. It's not what I do, it's not what that person does, it's what you do together. So I really believe in co-creation. And sometimes that co-creation goes that well and you like to work and just find out what else there is. So you're just starting a journey. And in some situations it happens, like I have a few clients that I work with now for 3-4 years. And sometimes it's a bit slower, what I do with it, or less work that I perform for them. But then it just starts again. But yeah, I really would like to, for a lot of people, also viewers, to just step into the energy that is already there, but also sometimes make bold decisions. Like if it doesn't work, don't just continue, just stop it, because I think it's best for the organization, but especially for the individual. And coming back to self-worth, yeah, then you don't lose face and you can stand up for yourself, and you haven't been like, yeah, how do you call that in English? Now I'm stuck with my thread. Aan het lijntje gehouden, I would say.
Ah, yeah. We'll keep the English in suspense. What does that mean? I think
On the leash, I think that's the right word.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonja. Thank you for sharing. There was a lot of wisdom in there, and for people to reflect on as well within their own lives. And perhaps if they work in organizations, how can they implement or maybe even co-create with you? Yeah. So
yeah, and I think that's an important one. Like, this is not about me at all. This is about this awareness. Yeah, what I always say is we need to raise the level of awareness for people in businesses, but also for individuals, because you are the one who is responsible and accountable for your own life. And if you wait for other people to decide for you, and that is what I've done in some elements or some phases in my own life, it doesn't feel right. So you need to make the choice for yourself that you will be a friend to yourself, that you start growing your self-worth, either by yourself or with people from the Self-Worth Academy or with whoever out there that you believe and trust. And then you can create a good world for yourself, but especially for your children, if you have children. And if you don't have children, you can still think of you can be a role model for other people.
Beautiful. I think that just summarized everything from the beginning, how you started as well, of like listening to your own, what is that inner self? And I'm very grateful and thankful for your time and to share with us. And I can't wait to experience Self-Worth Week and to hear more about the hidden box and anything else that you might be sharing with us. Is there anything else that you would like to say apart from what you just shared before?
I just wish everyone a lot of self-worth, but also some forgiveness. Sometimes it's okay that you try, and it's also you learn from it. If you don't hit walls, you will never learn. So hit a lot of walls and fail gracefully and just pick yourself up and go. So go, get your energy moving, you and other people as well.
Great. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Goodbye.